Okay, Erev Tov. And we learned tonight to continue for Noah Bat Shimrit, who continues to make Lian Hara miraculous recovery. Talked to Father this morning. Maybe she'll be going to Shikum going to rehab next week, which is unbelievable. Also, Holy Yisrael, Fuat Nefesh, Fuat Guf, and to everybody else who's sick except for the son of Yisrael. They don't need a refuah shlema. Anyways, okay. I'm gonna just give like a 1 minute thumbnail sketch of where we're holding because I don't want to repeat the whole thing up until this point. In general, we're holding as follows. This chapter has answered two questions now. The two questions were, why is it that it's said in the beginning of the book, but it didn't say, the book quotes the statement that says that a person, even if they're told they're a tzaddik, they should see themselves as a rasha. When the Pirkei Avot says, and Mishnah Avot says, you're not allowed to see yourself as a rasha. We answer that question in explaining that it doesn't mean that you should see yourself that you are actually a rasha, but you are kirasha. What does that mean? It meant that just like the rasha has a possibility of something springing forth and actually going into action, you have to see that you're, as a Benoni, the definition of the Benoni, this is how the Admar Zaken explains it and describes it, is a life of struggle. The struggle being that the Benoni is able to shut down the impulses, both in our mind, in our speech, and in our action, in machashava, dibur, and maaseh, can shut them down and prevent them from going to the next phase. The Rasha allows them, remember, to go in and out. So by seeing ourselves kirasha, we have to say, we haven't been able to vanquish, we haven't been able to eradicate the Yetzer Hara. It's there. We haven't been able to eradicate the ra, quote unquote, evil of machashava, dibur, and maaseh. It's there, and we have to be aware of it, and a matter of being aware of it constantly. And that explains also why is it that Rabbah in the Gemara said, like he's like me, I'm a Benoni. And the Gemara asked over there, what do you mean you're a Benoni? The words of Torah never stopped coming from him. So how is he considered a Benoni? How we should be like that? The answer is that again doesn't mean that he could not. And we saw also a person should never come to a point and say and feel he's a tzaddik because he does this right, he does this right, he doesn't have it yet. Should never feel that way because as soon as that happens, you let your guard down. When you let your guard down, then it allows the machashava, dibur, and maaseh to be taken over by the ra. So when Rabbah says, I'm like a Benoni, he means that he has to always keep his guard on, even though everyone tells him he's obviously a tzaddik. And even though he may feel like all I do is spend my life davening and learning Torah and teaching Torah and doing mitzvot nonstop, nevertheless, he still has to see himself as a Benoni in order to protect himself. The upshot, up until the point we got to last week, and I mentioned this also, is we can never forget who you are. You have to be self-aware. You have to be on guard, and you have to be honest with yourself. Part of what we're going to talk about tonight, we'll see, is truth in a moment. And we'll see some definitions and some changes, perhaps in our approach to the word. But I think that it's really important to put aside truth for a moment and let's talk about the word honesty. There was a time many years ago, I've told you over the years, there have been some weird things I tried as Rabbi of a shul. And one of the things I think I mentioned in one class, I don't remember which, probably was Mesilat Yesharim, that I wanted to do every year and decided not to, was the week before Yom Kippur to put up little mirrors in the hallway of the shul with a little note underneath it, which would say, can you look at yourself here? Meaning get people to think, can you look at yourself in the mirror? Many people, and I'm not talking about dysphoria, I'm not talking about the bad body image, I'm just talking about is a mashal, as a parable. Can you look at yourself and honestly give yourself a grade, so to speak, how you're doing in life, how you're doing in Avodat Hashem? Most people who say they can do that will usually err and the point of saying that they're really terrible. Oh gosh, me? I am such a Russia. You wouldn't even, if you really knew me, you wouldn't even want to go anywhere near me. And that's self-defeating. We will see as we move through this chapter now and later in other chapters. But when it comes to the concept of truth, so in order to introduce now where we're holding it, let me just bring this up on the screen. In most printings of Tanya, no, not this. Hold on. Do you show the words Vihine Midat Hava on the top of the screen? On my screen now? No. Okay, let me stop share. Oh, you did see it. Okay, good. I'll just make sure I have the right thing up here. Yes, thumbs up. Hine Midat Hava. Yes? Okay, good. In most printings of Tanya, where we got up to, there will be two dots and be followed by Vihine. The words Vihine Midat Ahava. Again, in most printings of Tanya, the way he wrote this book is that a period is kind of like a hard stop. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of them because there's a lot of run-on sentences. And the two dots is kind of like, okay, here's the information to this point here. Now we need to use that and bridge to the next part. And that's what we're about to do. But let's talk first before we get into this part of the paragraph. Again, we're in chapter 13. Hopefully, I hope to finish it tonight. There's not a lot left, but there's a lot to talk about. Because I'm in the world of education, I like to make comparisons using or mishalim, parables, using the educational ideas. If a student comes home with a grade of 67 on a test, is that good? Now, obviously, that's a very bad question because the answer is it depends. It depends, right? What does it depend on? Well, let's see. If the student was a PhD candidate and it was their final test to in improving their dissertation and everything else, they come with a 67% of a grade. It's not very impressive necessarily, but they passed. The 67 for everybody's a passing grade. Let's just make that assumption. Okay, let's talk a little more practical. You have two students. They're both in Kita Yud Aleph. They're grade 11, and they both took the same tests. And both come to you after the test, and they bring you your test, you mark them, and they both get a 67. So the one you pull aside and say, oh my gosh, that is absolutely fantastic. I am so proud of you. I'm calling your parents right now. The other student, you would say the same grade. What happened? What's wrong? What happened with you? Why? It's the same grade. Because grades are not binary. What do I mean by that? There's a background that comes with those grades. Now, when you take a standardized test and you're trying to get into an institution, you're trying to get into a school, it's black and white. You either got the higher number on your psychometry, or you got the higher number on the SAT, or you did it. Black and white. Okay? I'm not talking about that now. I'm talking about plain old school, a regular old test. Both students passed. What's the difference between the two reactions from the teacher? The kid that you went like, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable, is a student who never pays attention in class, or he pays attention, he doesn't understand what's going on. He has a private tutor. He constantly fails. He tries really hard, but just never passes. And then finally, on the final, gets a 67. Like, wow, this is fantastic. The other kid barely has to show up. He gets 100 and everything. So he gets a 67, something's wrong there, right? By the way, parenthetically, they do teach teachers who want to pay attention, and parents also, that when you have a student, child, who's always doing very well in school, and suddenly the grades dive, and not just one subject, but all the subjects across the board, it's a big red flag for stuff going on in their lives. So just keep that in mind. Anyways, end parentheses. So this other kid who normally was doing very well is like, this is a really not acceptable grade for the student. I had a student, she was grade 11 in Chicago. I taught honors Gemara to girls and to boys, two different classes. And his girls' class, she was number 2 in the class, I'd say. There was one who was literally a genius. She didn't take a single note. She remembered everything. And then there's this other girl. This other girl would get 96, 97, 99, or 100 on almost every Gemara test. And she came to me with an 87, and she's crying. I said, what's wrong? She's now married with 4 kids. She says, what's wrong? She said, I failed. I said, did you look at your paper? Does it say 50? He said, I want to retake the test. I said, no, this is just a regular test. It's not like a major exam. I want to retake the test. So I'll tell you what, you're not going to take this test, but I'm going to add a new test to this thing, a relatively short thing, and everyone will have the same chance. I can't give you an extra chance. So she came back to me after the next test. She got a 99, whatever it was. She comes back with this big smile, says, "I'm back in the game." Okay. So, and this, how many kids I've taught Baruch Hashem over the years, it's really stuck in my head, is also the student's perspective of themselves and what grades mean. I don't know about you, but when you with your children or grandchildren and you get your tuldot, the report card, the first thing I looked at always, whether my kids or my students now, is I look at the comments. The grades are secondary because the grades say something. Of course, you have to use them, but the comments are the important thing. Now, coming back to this example, why are these two grades, which are exactly the same? They're both 67. One's great, one's pretty lousy. Because it's a matter of relativity, right? Relative to the student's abilities, the 67 was good. Relative to the other student's ability, the 67 was a poor grade. Okay. Now, let's keep that in mind. Is 67 a passing grade? Yes, that's truth. The truth is a passing grade is 60, let's say. So 67 is black and white, a passing grade. But it's an acceptable grade and beyond acceptable. It's a good grade for one student, and it's got by the skin of his teeth and a lousy grade for the other one. With that little bit of background, let's take a look now. I'm going to read. I'll tell you where, because I was until the word kafi erka. Read till. Whoops. Don't go that far. Because I want to make sure. Okay, right. I'm reading this first slide. Let me get through the whole first slide here. I'm going to translate it, and then we're going to go back and talk about it. Midat ahava zo. This midah of ahava. We we're just talking about the fact that Rabbah was a person who was constantly immersed in Torah, constantly immersed in tefillah. He says, if only we could be a person who could just daven all day long and have this desire, this burning love for God, constantly, this love. This midah of ahava amura b'beinunim. B'shat tefillah, we said that the ahava, the love of God, the rishpei esh, this burning love, is awakened in the time of tefillah, and especially during Kriyat Shema. Meaning that just like we've already said, that there's this awakening of the ability of the nefesh elokit to overcome and overpower, so to speak, the nefesh abahamit, etc., which he says, etc., because we've already talked about it. When it comes to the level of tzaddikim who serve Hashem to the true truth, I'll explain that soon. The kind of love that a Benoni has, if it were a tzaddik having that kind of love for Hashem, meaning that short window, that would not be avodah emet, true service of Hashem at all. Why? For a tzaddik. Why? Because as we've spoken about, it passes by after davening's over. It falls apart. Even it says, truth of the tongue, meaning the speech is permanently truth. Vad argia lashon sheker, but sheker, falsehood, is passive. Just let me translate that, and we're going to come back to that, obviously. Now, so at this point, it sounds pretty disheartening for the Benoni. I get all fired up. I went and davened this morning. I had this intention when I said brachot of Shema, and when I said Shema, I really connected to Hashem, and there was this ahava karish pe'esh. And that's truth. That's the truth of my connection to Hashem. Now he's saying, because really, if it were tzaddik, there'd be a zero. There'd be nothing. That wouldn't be truthful love of God. Says, oh man, what am I going to waste my time for? However, like I said in my mashal, ve'af al pichein, nevertheless, I'm right over here. Legabei madrigata benonim, when it comes to the level of a benoni, who has this temporary, strong love of Hashem at certain points of the day, and especially hopefully during tefillah, nikret avodah tama be'emet lamito. It is called a simple form of true truth. Shelahem. It is their truth. Ish ish kefi madregato umadregata benonim. Each benoni according to his level. Now, before I continue, I do need to explain this line. If you were to take the benoni relative to the tzaddik, the goodness and the love of Hashem on the one side of the benoni, relative to the love of Hashem of the tzaddik, then the love of the benoni would not seem to be real truth. Why? Because truth means it's constant, it's perfect, it is always. It's like that for the tzaddik, but not for the benoni. Now the Alter Rebbe is telling us what? That relative to the benoni, ba'asher hu sham, who he is as a benoni, at his level. Remember, we say there's tens of thousands of levels of benoni. So at the level he is at, for that moment when he has the ability to feel this burning love of Hashem, that is his truth for that moment at his level of a benoni. Oops. I want to do this. I'm here right now. Vaharein. When I learned Tanya, this teacher over those few years, I wouldn't know this myself, obviously. He pointed out that this is the only place in Tanya that the Alter Rebbe speaks in first person, because he wants to make this personal. He wants to make sure we hear him clearly, which is as follows. Vahareini kore ba'avatam shebetfilatam. And here I declare, I call the love that a Benoni has for Hashem at their moment of their tefillah, gam kein sfat emet tikon la'ad. I also consider this the permanent, everlasting love of Hashem. Why? It's passing. How can you call it permanent? We're going to come back to that. Because the Benoni can at any time reawaken that love. Remember, we talked about this already. It's like that love is asleep, and it can be reawakened. How? On a daily basis, it can be reawakened. His overcoming the nefesh habahamit during tefillah on a daily basis, based on proper preparation, the chol nefesh for each individual, based on the level that they are at that moment. Okay, a lot of stuff here. I said a lot. He said a lot. We need to talk about. If you understood my mashal before about the grades, we're basically saying as follows. If I were to take when I say binary, it means it's either 1 or 0, or it's yes or no, black or white. If I were to say based on just black and white, if we translate the word emet as something that is always, always true, it does not change, then the love of a Benoni for Hashem, even during that few minutes in tefillah, is not emet, because it's not always like that. It changes. By the tzaddik, it's always like that. By the Benoni, it's not. So it's not emet. But that's if we do a relative scale. In other words, relative to the tzaddik, of course, it's not emet. But relative to the Benoni, relative to that individual himself, right now during tefillah, for those few minutes, it is pure emet. Now, wait a second. Isn't that a little bit contradictory? I just translated emet. I didn't, but he did, and he quotes the pasuk. I'm pointing. You put my finger. You can't see my screen when I'm pointing. Sfat emet, here. Sfat emet, tikon la'ad. The lips, the voice, the language of truth is everlasting. Well, it's not. Okay, so on the one hand, we can understand that we can say, wow, that's really emet when you just look at him, just the Benoni as himself, not relative to somebody else, and not relative to another Benoni. Because to another Benoni, the other Benoni might be at a higher level, might be at a lower level, but just relative to himself, it's emet at that moment. How is that possible? Okay, so we have some things to look at. Let's skip that. Okay, this I wanted to show you before. I already said this, so it's going to go by that. Okay, let's talk about this slide. Let me just see if one of the examples I want to give is something that he quotes or not. about the Korban Tamid. Actually, let me tell it to you now. Okay. Let me take this off a screen share for a second so you don't get distracted by the slide. The word Tamid means always. Tamid. He always does that. There are two times at least where the Torah uses the word Tamid. We have something that's called the Korban Tamid. What was the Korban Tamid? That once in the morning and once in the afternoon, a Korban was brought. It was the first sacrifice of the day. It was the last sacrifice of the day. It was brought Ben Harabayim, the one at the end of the day, meaning the afternoon. There's another thing in the Beit HaMikdash that was Tamid, and that was the Lechem HaPanim. It had to always be bread on the Shulchan, and not the kind of bread we picture. Both are referred to as Tamid. But wait a minute. I just said that the Korban Tamid was only brought in the morning and the evening. So what's the Tamid? What's Tamid about it? It's not permanent. It's not always. It's once in the morning, once in the evening. Lechem HaPanim was all the time. It was always there. So there obviously have to be different kind of definition for Tamid or Nitzchi, which means also forever. We're going to talk about that. But let's take a look at this first slide from Steinsaltz. And should be always, the implication should always be, if I don't say it, Zecher Tzaddik V'Kadosh Livrach. He said in the text, that relative to the Benoni himself, it is considered simple, true truth for them. Each one according to the level he is as a Benoni. Now, let's see what Rav Steinsaltz says. The expression, the truth of truth, or to the depths of truth of them, for them, paradox. It would seem to be a paradox. Remember, a paradox is a seeming contradiction. Why is it a seeming why is it a seeming contradiction? You say it's truth, but it's their truth. Okay, like if someone says, let's use the modern ridiculous, absolutely mind-blowing foolishness in this world of people can say, as a guy, I think I'm a woman. I'm not talking about the genes. I'm not talking about the mental health. I'm just saying, I had like this woman who identified herself as a cat. Okay, don't ask. She identifies as a cat. That's her truth. That's stuyot, because it's not truth. It's her truth. What do you mean it's her truth? It's not true. She can't be a cat. So it seems like a paradox. What do you mean it's their truth for that moment? But when take everything into consideration, it's very significant. The framework of truth as it is classified here. It is the truth based on the situation. When it comes to the word truth as a standalone word, it's something very simple. It is permanent. There's only one kind of truth like that. But the true truth or depth of truth for them, this is what I was saying before. Their love of Hashem, that's pure truth that comes out at certain times, and especially hopefully during Tefillah and by Shema, is a relative measure. Emet chelkit, partial truth. Ha'emet ha'sobjektivit shel adam misuyam. It's the subjective truth of a certain individual. Emet kazo yechola shelo liot emet machar. This truth may not be true tomorrow, meaning you may not have that same feeling tomorrow. Aval hayom hi emet lamito. But at this moment, it is truth. Kashem sheyesh emet achat lakol. Just like there is a concept of truth that's for everybody, sheina mishtana, that doesnn't change, and doesn't change in some such a situation. For example, you and I, we are human beings. That doesn't change, period. We are always human beings as long as we are alive. That's a truth. That's a permanent truth for everybody. So too, there is a truth that exists and is correct in a moment in time for an individual. It's the truth, the depth of truth for a certain situation. And it might and maybe even must change tomorrow. As that student, going back to my mashal, stood there with his 67, who really studied and who really finally passed the test for the first time this year, at that moment, that's his truth. That's the true truth. He did phenomenally well. You're very proud. Does that mean he's going to pass every test afterwards? No. Does that mean he's going to be doing even better than that the next day? Not necessarily. But he may use it as a building block for more truth. And this understanding, also a Benoni can truly get to his experience of truth at his level. That's his subjective truth. So in a sense, what he's saying is that there's objective truth, subjective truth. Objective truth is you and I are human beings. I'm a male, some of you are female, some of you are male. That's an objective truth. Subjectively, each one of us has a different truth when it comes to our love and relationship with Hashem. That love that I may have during Shema is not absolute. It is not permanent. Not because it's fake. This is important. Not because it's fake or it's some kind of a game, right? It's a sleight of hand. Because the Benoni has not yet arrived at that balance. He hasn't arrived at the balance necessary for this permanent truth. If he were to actually be able to get to that level of this balance inside his neshama, he would no longer be a Benoni. Ella, didn't cut the rest of it. Okay, let me just find it in my book. I'm going to read you. You don't have these lines on your screen, so don't look at the screen. Ella Tzaddik, if he's able to get to that point where he constantly has this love of Hashem, and he's been able to overcome and overpower the Yetzer Hara, the Sitra Achra, and the left side of the heart, he's no longer a Benoni, he's a Tzaddik. I mentioned a Benoni, B'shashu mitpalel. The truth of the Benoni when he's davening, B'shashu margish mashu. At the moment he feels this twinge, he feels this love, he ha'emet subjektivit shelo. That's his subjective love at that moment. But it's truth. That's his truth at that moment. It's not a lie. Just one more line. It's only his truth. It's not your truth. It's mine at that moment. As based on his level of Benoni asidi. I just made that word up. Benoni kafi shenemar hu ein sfor madrigot shonot zomizo. That there are endless amounts of levels of Benoni from one to another. So therefore, every one of us can have a different experience during davening. You may have a fleeting moment during Shema or Shmona Esrei or Brachot in the morning, like, oh my gosh, I just love God. This is overwhelming. And that's a true, unadulterated, pure love of Hashem. And that's the truth. And that's then. I may not have that. I may have a greater, deeper feeling at some point. And that's my truth. Basher Husham. Did I tell you the thing about Atifat Ishmaelim, the talit? Did I tell it to you? If anyone remembers, let me tell, because it fits here now. In the Shulchan Aruch, when it talks about putting on a talit in the morning, it talks about how you wrap it. Unfortunately, many men wrap their talit wrong. They just kind of take it and close it in front of their face, and they open it back up. That's not atifa. When you make a bracha, you're saying atef b'tzitzit, to wrap yourself in the tzitzit, meaning the talit in this case. That's not atifa. Okay, what's atifa? Where you put it over your head. There are different customs of how to do it, and you take both ends and you put it over your shoulder, and you leave your face open. You don't cover your face. The face is open. It's over the head. If I had my talit right next to me, I'd show you. And then you put them over your shoulder. So what happens is, it's as if you pretend it's a blanket. You take it, but you don't put it over your face. You put it partially over your, up to about here, and you take the two sides, bunch them together, and put them over your left shoulder. And if someone looks at you at that moment, that step is called atifat yishmaelim, to wrap yourself like an Ishmaelite, like Yishmael. Really? Of all the things that that in Shulchan Aruch that they could have used as an example, they use that. Why? Because what's happening? When does the guy put on his talit? Before tefillah? Unless it's he's starting down before Bishiyakir, and he can't. Okay, under normal circumstances, he's putting it on before tefillah. Why in the world are we mentioning Yishmael, who ends up being the beginning of the line of the most amount of people in this world who've ever tried to and have succeeded in killing Jews? So if you remember the story, what happens to Ishmael and Hagar, they're in the desert, they run out of water. Hagar, in a beautiful act of love, throws her son under a bush and turns and doesn't even look. I don't want to see my son die. And Hashem tells her, like, says, okay, look, hey, dude, there's water, go take water. Go. And he says, I saw him, Ba'asher Husham. I saw Yishmael as he is now, because there was this whole hue and cry in the heavens. Why in the world, God, do you want to save this man who we know is going to end up causing so much devastation to the Jewish people? Hashem says, what I'm judging him on is Ba'asher Husham, how he is right this very moment. So no matter what baggage a person comes to shul with, no matter what baggage a person starts when they open their siddur at home, in the field, in the store, in the bus, or in shul, Hashem, we want to say to Hashem, judge us at this moment, Ba'asher Husham. Here I am. I'm coming to daven. Yesterday I messed up big time. I did this wrong. I didn't make my brachot. I forgot to daven. I forgot to put on tefillin. I didn't eat prod. Whatever it might be. Ba'asher Husham. Atifat Yishmaelim reminds us that that's how we're supposed to start our day in our mind. Don't come with baggage. Don't come with that. And that can help increase our feeling of love as we come to the center part of the davening of the Shema and the Shemona Esrei. And that's what he's telling us, that when we have gotten this awakening, so to speak, that it helps us to understand that that moment, we're almost like a tzaddik, because that's our truth. Just like the tzaddik's truth is permanent, our truth is momentarily permanent. And again, that's the conundrum, or that's the paradox. It's momentarily permanent, which sounds contradictory, obviously. Okay, so we didn't get to this line yet. Let's go back into the text. Okay. And let's make this a little bigger. Okay. Just a second, I want to take a look at the note I had here. If I had anything I wanted to add here first. Okay. Yeah, I told you about the word tamid. Okay. That's not in the text. That's something that I heard in the shir. That's why I had a note here to tell you. Okay. Very good. So let's continue where he says here, where it says, Kihine. Kihine midat emet, midato shel Yaakov. We know that there, first of all, I'm sure you've seen Sidurim emet Yaakov, and we've seen Titene emet Yaakov was in Tfilah, Titene emet Yaakov, Chesla Abraham. We say in Atayachad Shimcha Echad Mikam Chayisad Goy Echad Baaretz Tifer Yishua Yom Menucha. Okay, we say also emet for Yaakov. He is associated with truth. Why is that? By the way, not he doesn't talk about this, but why is that seems contradictory to connect Yaakov with truth? Just think about the story with him and Esav. Was that truth? Kol kol Yaakov Adam Yidei Esav, right? So that's your homework. So a few weeks ago that we read that parasha, and where Yaakov seems to have tricked his father, and even though Yaakov says, Yitzchak says, Ba'achicha b'mirma, your brother came with trickery. Uncle says there, the chuchma or b'chuchmata. He came with chochma. He came with wisdom. Okay, but how is it that we connect Yaakov to truth when he did something like that? Okay, put that question aside, because if it's in your head, I need to mention it. So let's talk about here. What does he say? Ki midat emet, ki midato shel Yaakov. The truth, the midah, the characteristic of truth, is associated with Yaakov. Hanikra b'riach hatichon, hamavriach min hakatzeh lakatzeh. Okay, first, in order to understand this statement, we have to understand something else first. I forgot I was going to bring a picture. Let me see if I have a book available right here. Yeah, hang on one second. Okay, I can't get to it real quickly. Let me just explain to you in order to understand this next statement, you have to understand something about the way the Mishkan worked. The Mishkan was made out of the wall around the Mishkan was made out of panels. And each panel had like what we would call today tongue and groove in the base. So it would have like posts that would stick into a frame on the bottom. And so they wouldn't wobble and fall all over the place. They had three ways that they made the wall sturdy. On the outside of the wall, upper part, on the outside, there was a pole that went through rings that connected through all these different planks. That was on top and the one on the bottom. And then through the actual center of the planks or the boards, krashim, there was another piece that was called the bariach hatichon. And that ran through the center of all the planks. And as the Gemara tells us, in a miraculous way, it also turned the corner and continued through to the other end. It wasn't two pieces. It was actually one piece that just somehow in a miraculous way turned. Okay, so now with that piece of information, let's start the slide again. Sorry. The midah, the character trait of truth, is that of Yaakov. Hanikra, he himself was known as the Bariach Hatichon, Hamavriach min hakatze lakatze. This center beam, or rather post, that one went from one end to another. Miruma ma'alot madregot ad sof kol dargin, that his truth would go from one extreme to the other, from all the different levels, from all the different heights, to every different level. It would bore through every single level of truth. Now, hang in there. I know this may not make any sense to you, so just hang in there. And the midah, the characteristic of truth, is a concept of existence with no problems and no pain. There is no upper level, to the highest level. And anything below it is as if they don't exist. Okay. What you talk about? What's going on? I got up until the parentheses. Okay. So I'm going to put on the screen. Let me see if I have it marked up here. Okay, let me take it here first. Okay. Oh, actually, didn't I take a picture of this? Hold on a second. Here, this comes first. I put it out of order. Okay. What's this business about the Bariach HaTichon and all? Okay. Let me read this to you. Hopefully it'll make some sense. And then we will, I may not read that last little piece because I don't want to rush through it, because that last line has a lot to it. Okay, let me just read through this slide at least. Okay, so this is Mavriach min hakatze lakatze. This is quoting from Shemot Kaf Vav, Parshat Truma. It talks about the physical building of the Mishkan, the parts. The outer rod went, nowadays you use where bariach is a hinge, but it wasn't hinged, would go on the outside of the planks, right? One on top and one near the bottom. They're made of two parts. So each part would go until the middle of the wall. One would go in this side, one would go on this side, and they come to the center. However, on the other hand, the internal bariach, or pin, so let me use that word, even though it's not right, that went through the actual planks, would go through the hole in the middle of the planks. It would go from one end to the other, as it says in the Gemara, that pole, that beam, that pin bent in a miraculous fashion. And it went through because the shape of the whole wall around the Mishkan was a chet. Okay, it was like a chet. 1, 2, 3. It went through all the planks on the inside, one piece to one solid, beginning to end. So too, in the understanding in the spiritual sense. The Bariach HaTichon, which he says is the representation of the concept of truth, goes from one end to another, from one extreme to another. What does that mean? From the highest to the lowest? Nikudat ha'emet hi mitzad echad. The point of truth is, on one hand, hakatzeh alyon habilti musag. It's the highest height. I mean, what's the highest truth? Hashem. We can't fathom that truth. Nikudat hanetzach shel hashleimut ha'amitit. The point of permanent, the point of completeness of truth. That's on one end. Mitzad sheni zo she'overet betoch hakrashim. On the other hand, there's a truth that would go, so to speak, between the posts, between the boards. Kol havaya shebemitziut yesh ba mashu shel emet. Everything that exists has some form of truth to it. Yesh ba et nekudat ha'emet shela. It has its own point of truth. L'chei midat ha'emet hi kav nimshach milamala le'ensof ad lamata le'en tachlit. Truth extends from the highest possible realm, i.e. up all the way to Hashem, to the lowest level of nothingness. Mina katzeh la katzeh, betoch kol hadvarim upnimiutam. En ketz la'agdarat hadavar sheyachol liot emet. There is no way to codify, to quantify, to describe exactly truth. Mina katzeh elyon shel hametziut, from one end of extreme of existence, ad madrega tachtona biyoter, to the lowest level. Whatever level of truth there is truth, meaning no matter where, again, just to kind of put it to our case here, you shouldn't think that because the way you feel during davening for that, or maybe during a wedding, or possibly chas v'shalom even at a funeral, that moment of closeness to Hashem that's burst forth, that your truth, because it's passing, it's not really truth. Because the midah of truth extends through, is an endless spectrum. Maybe that's the word I would like to use. It's endless spectrum. And that somewhere on that spectrum, you are always there at some form of truth. No, you're not going to get to the highest truth. That's Hashem. And God forbid, not to the lowest truth. A rock has truth to it as well, because it exists. But you're there somewhere. That's the Bariach HaTichon. The Bariach HaTichon represents truth because it spans from one end to the other. What does that mean? As it says in the Gemara, the nachala, the inheritance with no, it doesn't mean pain, it means no borders, it means borderless, is the nachala of Yaakov. By all the other avot, by Avraham and Yitzchak, there is a like there's a limitation factor. The Yitzchak, there was a limitation factor. For Yaakov, he was told you should spread out in every single direction. There's no limit to that. As opposed to other characteristics that can be limited in their existence and in the way we can describe them. There is no border. There's no boundary to truth. Only Hashem is true, 100% unadulterated truth. All other things that exist, all flow from the truth of Hashem's existence. Again, their truth is only truth relative to Him. Midah of truth is therefore the midah of God. Because the borders, the borders are the borders of the infinite, meaning Hashem. Okay. Here's what I want to do. The person I learned from gave a beautiful talk on this. It's a few minutes long. I'm going to, in the beginning of next class, because I can give this my own explanation, but I want you to hear from the expert how he describes this last piece. And then what we'll do to conclude this chapter, we'll do next week, is if you go back up here, you'll see, back here, let me make it small for a second, is this last little paragraph, this last sentence, okay? See, it's very innocuous, but it is powerful, truly powerful. So we're going to save this, put it in red, and save it for next time. Bezrat Hashem. So two things we're going to start off with next week is Rav Silverberg's explanation of this last piece about the Bariach HaTichon, and then we're going to talk about this last piece. After we do that, you should know that we will have finished a significant section of time, because it's the end of, if you remember, I'm sure you don't, but if you were to remember, when we talked about the beginning of the book and the introduction, I said, okay, break Tanya into chunks. And the first chunk basically is, let's say, 1 through 8, then 9 through 13. So when we finish through chapter 13, because we've talked about Tzaddik, Benoni, Rasha, we've explained what do you mean Kirasha, we've answered a couple of the questions. When we move, we're going to use that as the building blocks for the next chapters. But this really is a major accomplishment when we finish up through chapter 13 in Tanya. So we'll finish Bezrat Hashem next week. Yeah. Okay. Very good. That's what I want to end with. Have a good evening. And
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And do good things. Don't get disheartened if tonight the last part seemed a little bit out there. I'll find a good explanation for you for it.
Good.
And
That's
we'll get together
good.
next week. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well.
Take care.
You too. You will. Bye-bye.